Easy Explain Up from Slavery by Booker T. Washington. Success. So this is going to cover the last big chunk of the book and also the last big umbrella theme for Booker T. Washington, what it means for him to be successful. So let's start by looking at what it looks like to take some self-control over the act of worrying. So here Washington says that all worry simply consumes and to no purpose, just so much physical and mental strength that might otherwise be given to effective work. After considerable experience in coming into contact with wealthy and noted men, I have observed that those who have accomplished the greatest results are those who keep under the body, are those who never grow excited or lose self-control, but are always calm, self-possessed, patient, and polite. That's just a good set of virtues we're looking at here from Booker T. Very stoic in a sense, right? Staying grounded, staying level-headed, and he said, that's how you should approach your work. Further, he also thinks you should lose yourself in the work. So let's look at what he has to say about this. He says, in order to be successful in any kind of undertaking, I think the main thing is for one to grow to the point where he completely forgets himself. That is, to lose himself in a great cause. In proportion as one loses himself in this way, in the same degree does he get the highest happiness out of his work. So I think, nowadays, 125 years later, in our modern speaking, we probably call it like a flow state, right? Of just getting so into something that you just lose yourself in it. But he also says, you got to work hard, right? Hard work, to reference Nick Kroll, a comedian, his emphasis on this. He says that Booker T. Washington says that nothing ever comes to one that is worth having except as a result of hard work, right? Determination, motivation, putting your head down, losing yourself in that work, having that patience and just getting it done. And now here is actually what ends up becoming a very controversial statement that W.E.B. Du Bois is actually going to start picking at Washington for. Here Washington says, cast down your bucket where you are, cast it down in making friends in every manly way of all the people of all the races by whom we are surrounded. This is one of the areas that W.E.B., we're going to consider next, has an issue with Booker T. We're going to touch back on this controversy again in a little bit, but let's also begin at the bottom with Washington here. He says, no race can prosper till it learns that there is as much dignity in tilling a field as in writing a poem. It is at the bottom of life we must begin and not at the top, nor should we permit our grievances to overshadow our opportunities. Again, this is just digging the hole a little deeper for Washington as far as Du Bois is concerned. Du Bois definitely doesn't agree with this mentality, so let's jump to this big controversy next. Du Bois, really flames Booker T for this one. Booker T says, in all things that are purely social, we can be as separate as the fingers, yet one as the hand, in all things essential to mutual progress. So, reading Up from Slavery and seeing where Booker T. Washington is coming from, this does make sense with his life outlook, his philosophy, his work ethic. But as far as the social progress that W.E.B. Du Bois really wants to see and really wants to see working towards, he does not agree with this, right? We're going to look at that a little more closely later on. But this quote right here specifically does spark a pretty big controversy in that regard. Let's move on for now. Let's look at what Booker T has to say about purpose. He says, the longer I live and the more experience I have of the world, the more I am convinced that after all, the one thing that is most worth living for and dying for, it need be, is the opportunity of making someone else more happy and more useful, right? That is where your purpose comes from. So not only are you making yourself more useful and from that finding your happiness, but we have to share that, right? We have to help propagate that and give that to other people. So here finally I pulled out I think there's about 4 passages coming up here that I think are some great last words to hear from Booker T. Washington on a lot of these themes. So here he says, to say what we will, there is something in human nature which we cannot blot out, which makes one man, in the end, recognize and reward merit in another, regardless of color or race. There's that big, heavy emphasis on merit one more time. He also says that no man who continues to add something to the material, intellectual, and moral well-being of the place in which he lives is long left without proper reward. This is a great human law which cannot be permanently nullified. Then he also says, I believe that any man's life will be filled with constant, unexpected encouragements of this kind if he makes up his mind to do his level best each day of his life. That is, tries to make each day reach as nearly as possible the high water mark of pure, unselfish, useful living. I pity the man, black or white, who has never experienced the joy and satisfaction that come to one by reason of an effort to assist in making someone else more useful and more happy. And finally, the final word. Washington says, the great human law that in the end recognizes and rewards merit is everlasting and universal. At least I think it's very pretty to think so. So here's a lot of things that Booker T. Washington has to say about success to wrap up his work Up from Slavery. Hope it helps.